Oh, thank you, Karen. And I want to add my voice to thanking our speaker tonight, Elaine Goodman, and Heidi Cogleton, and the Native Plant Society for hosting us tonight. I think the fates have brought us together, and I think we are two groups that have common goals and common purposes and common interests, and I think it's wonderful that we can share this evening together. So thank you all for doing that for us. And we welcome you to the Nature Club's meeting here. We have a wonderful program for tonight. As you know, it's about beaver. You know, most organisms in nature, most animals, they survive by adapting to their environment. But there are two species that adapt the environment to them. One of those species are humans, and the other are beaver. A little over 100 years ago, the North American beaver was virtually extirpated from New Jersey and many other states in the lower 48. It was gone. There's a long, sad history about that, and Elaine will be telling you about all of that. But now they're back. And tonight you're going to learn, if you don't know already, why we should welcome them back. The beavers are remarkable people. They are, well, remarkable animals. Most animals are people if you get to know them well. And our speaker tonight is Elaine Goodman. Elaine is a longtime member of the Nature Club, as well as a prominent member of the Native Plant Society here. Not only has she researched the beaver program, but at her lovely home in Winona, which, by the way, is surrounded by beautiful woodland gardens. I love your property. It's just gorgeous. But Elaine, her property borders on a small stream called the Monongahela Branch of Mantua Creek. And her neighbors are beaver. They've been very active along in her property, so she knows them well. And so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Elaine Goodman, how the beavers shape the North American landscape, and why we should let them do it again. Give her a round of applause, please.
First of all, I hope you don't mind. There are two things. I'm very deaf, and I have a bad leg, so I'm going to be sitting, okay? And if there are questions at the end, I'm going to need somebody to come up and tell me what people are asking because I can't hear. So, and I'm going to read most of this because I'm afraid I'm going to forget some details. So forgive me on that. First, I want to tell you how I got involved in this whole thing with the beavers. The Monongahela Brook, which he just mentioned, runs diagonally through my yard. About 20 years ago, I noticed a young tulip tree had been chopped down. It had this little V, and I thought my sons did it with an axe. I thought, why did they cut down this tree? And then I saw tooth marks on the trunk, and I realized it had to be beavers. Beavers had already returned to the Mantua Creek several years before that, and I was told that eventually their young would come upstream to establish their own territories, and I was thrilled. 2 years ago, I saw my first live beaver in the brook, thanks to Jamie Fallon, who was working on the bog trail and sent an email to tell me a beaver was on its way to my yard. I was on my porch at my computer. I ran outside, and sure enough, there was a swimming past ignoring me. There was a big beaver running up the stream. Busy making a dam on the brook, beavers began hacking away at my many trees. Every night at dusk, one or two would come by. They have very poor eyesight, and I discovered that if I remained very still, I could watch them chomping on my trees as close as 5 feet from me and hear them. You could hear them chomping, chomp, chomp, chomp. Sometimes there was a squabble, which was also fun to watch. It became a daily ritual. Every night at dusk, I went out to my screen house and sat with a glass of wine waiting for and watching beavers. I knew nothing about them. In fact, about a year ago, I asked Scott, do they eat fish? I thought that's why they made their ponds, and it's not true. I'll tell you all about that. But I didn't know anything about beavers. Okay. I want to give a shout out to Marna Carlton and Rick Mitchell. I was at a party, and I bent their ear for a long time about beavers because I was so excited about them, and they gave me this book. It came in the mail. I didn't know where it was from. It was very sweet of them, a book called Beaverland, which is excellent. Okay. Let's go with the slideshow. Oh, wait a minute. Oops, there we go. It has been estimated that before Europeans arrived, North America was home to between 15 and 200 million beaver ponds. That is a huge number. Each pond was roughly an average of an acre in size. It appears that 234,000 square miles of North America were submerged, an area that would fit 32 New Jerseys. Flowing water in every watershed throughout the land was dammed before it reached its destination. That's why I said they formed North America. This is the range of the original beavers before Europeans arrived. Before European settlement, 60 to 400 million beavers occupied nearly every aquatic habitat between the Arctic and Mexico, dramatically shaping the behavior of water with their dams. River ecosystems and landscapes across the country evolved around their complex wet meadows and pond systems, giving beavers an outsized role in the hydrology, ecology, and geology of North American rivers. What we see is nothing like North America was when the beavers were in charge. Their dams helped retain water, mitigated flooding, and recharged groundwater. Floods were alleviated and groundwater was recharged by slowing, spreading, storing, and sinking water. They helped retain water runoff. It meant that little fish had a chance to grow and fatten up in quiet streams full of microorganisms instead of being swept downstream on swift currents. Waterfowl could breed and multiply in the peaceful ponds. Moose, wolves, cougars, coyotes, deer, and foxes drank from the ponds and foraged or hunted along their banks. Beaver created songbird habitat and wildlife flourished. Beavers build dams for protection. This is what I never realized. I thought they built dams for fish, but that they don't. They build dams for protection. They like to enter their lodges from below the water level to deter predators. If the water in their habitat is deep enough to allow them to swim below the surface to access their lodges, they don't build dams. I made this watercolor, I copied it out of a book, but it's how the dam works, okay? I mean, how the lodges work. Beaver lodges are entered from underwater, which protects them from most predators. The USA, this is from the USA Today. It says, in the beaver's traditional range, which before the arrival of the trappers stretched from south of the Arctic tundra to northern Mexico and from the Pacific to the Atlantic, the dams they built provided a haven from predators as well as habitat for an array of creatures, including insects, frogs, and songbirds. Scientists have come to view their landscape engineering as beneficial and even critical to some vulnerable ecosystems. In many places south of the tundra, conservationists have moved to protect and reintroduce beavers to restore streams and wetlands. You see how they enter under here, and their babies are kept in there, and also you'll see the animals on the top. I'll talk about that later, but there were animals that became extinct along with the beavers because they had no places to be safe, which is on top of beaver lodges. The tundra swans. We'll talk about that later. Okay. Beavers are herbivores. They eat leaves, twigs, bark, and cambium from deciduous trees. They also eat soft plant foods like clover, cattail shrubs, apples, beans, and corn. The beavers in my yard love the bark on the trees, and they have girdled some big tree bark. And I'm something wrong with me because I let them do it. I sat there and watched them because it was fascinating. They'd come up and they'd take pieces of the bark off. Every night they'd come up and take some more bark. Until finally, but the trees are still alive. I don't know why. They should be dead. I'm just waiting for them to fall down. But they don't eat the wood. They just eat the cambium and the bark. And in the wintertime, they live on twigs and bark that they've collected. So about next month, they will start really foraging big time by going out and getting as much as they can to store. They make a cache so that they can eat in the wintertime. Okay. A beaver pond is the epicenter of a whole dynamic system. Beavers created perfect habitat for fish nurseries. I can watch, they prevent the fish from going downstream, so all these little fish multiply dramatically with beavers. Okay. Indigenous people revered beavers, and some made them part of their diet. In 1975, James Trefethen wrote, "A beaver pond is more than a body of water supporting the needs of a group of beavers, but the epicenter of a whole dynamic ecosystem." Okay, keystone species, a species on which other species in an ecosystem largely depend, such that if it were removed, the ecosystem would change drastically. The beavers are definitely a keystone species. The role that a keystone species plays in its ecosystem is analogous to the role of a keystone in an arch. While the keystone is under the least pressure of any of the stones in the arch will still collapses without it. An ecosystem will experience a dramatic shift if the keystone species is removed, though that species is a small part of the ecosystem. As stated by the Canadian author Francis Backhouse, the longer that beaver dams have been around, the more liable they are to have affected the evolution of countless other species, from aquatic invertebrates and plants to fish, amphibians, and wetlands-dependent birds and mammals. Ecologists call beavers a keystone species essential to the well-being of many other animals and plants, as well as the environment itself. Clearly, they are a keystone species. Well, along came the Pilgrims. Okay, they entered a world of abundant game, fish, and land. Forests were felled to build homes and cleared for farming. Beaver meadows were perfect, fertile spaces to grow crops, without the beavers, of course. Okay. When early settlers came to New England, they were astonished at the abundance, declaring you could walk across the rivers on the enormous numbers of fish. They reported that the rivers ran silver. There's a whole book about that, too, called The Rivers Run Silver, I think that's what it's called. But it's about how you could walk across rivers. There were so many fish. And that was because of the beavers. Okay, partly. Colonial farmers in New England saw beavers as a nuisance. In New England, out of necessity, the Pilgrims became farmers. They considered beaver pests and chased them out of the area. They destroyed their dams, killed the beavers, and planted seeds in the fertile meadows left behind when the ponds were drained. The Northeast was changed forever when beavers were virtually eliminated and could no longer do the job they had been doing from time immemorial. The entire landscape began to change. Fish numbers dropped and wildlife was pushed to the margins. Many species disappeared from the region forever. Wildlife is inconvenient for human habitation and pushed aside. The question is, at what price? And then came the Dutch. Actually, about the same time the Pilgrims came, the Dutch came. But the Dutch West India Company settled Manhattan Island. It was for trade. The main commodity they could sell to Europeans was furs, especially beaver furs. The Dutch who settled New Amsterdam, which later became Manhattan, came here to trade and make money. The main trade item for the Dutch West India Company was furs, which they exchanged for manufactured goods, tools, cloth, and so forth. Most fur-bearing animals had been largely wiped out in Europe. But here, in this unexploited land, fox, rabbit, mink, and beaver were abundant and easily captured. Many indigenous people were put to work bringing in pelts. I didn't realize that so much. The Indians were taught to bring in the furs. They knew how to trap them. Canada's Hudson Bay Company and John Jacob Astor's American Fur Company accumulated enormous wealth as the fur trade expanded. These are some of the animals that suffered when the beaver were eliminated. By the mid-1840s, beavers were wiped out from Colorado to California. Other species dependent on beaver-created habitat vanished as well. In the 1820s, mountain men began ransacking beaver habitat in the West, selling hundreds of thousands of beaver pelts to merchants on the East Coast and Europe to be made into hats. By the mid-1840s, beaver were wiped out from Colorado to California. Wetlands and meadows dried up. Erosion was hastened. When the ponds were destroyed, trumpeter swans, who had reared their young alongside beavers and on top of their lodges for millennia, began to disappear. Frogs, otters, salmon, and trout also took an enormous hit. Here are the hats. Beaver fur made gorgeous soft felt, which was groomed into place using mercury. Mercury caused neurological damage to those who made the hats. That's where the phrase "mad as a hatter" came from. Your hatter, mad as a hatter, came from came from. Hatters and the environment were contaminated by mercury, which lingers in some abandoned hat factory sites today. Mountain men made fortunes exterminating beavers and selling their pelts. The Hudson Bay Company in Canada waxed wealthy on beaver pelts. Beaver dams and lodges are built using tree branches, vegetation, rocks, and mud. They chew down trees for building material. Dams and, I wish you could have seen my yard one year, but they really went to town. There were I come out in the morning, there'd be branches all over the place, and they'd strip off the leaves, they'd eat the leaves, leave the branches. I ended up working for the Beavers because they get their branches tangled in other branches. They cut it without realizing it's going to fall into some other branch, so I take them down so they could get to them. Idiot. Anyway, vegetation. Dams impound water, and lodges serve as shelters. Their infrastructure creates wetlands used by many, many other species. Because of their effect on other organisms, they are still considered a keystone species. Beavers mark their territories using scent mounds of mud, debris, and castoreum, a liquid excreted through the beaver's castor sacs. Beavers tolerate relatives identified by scent. As beavers disappeared over the last 3 centuries, first from extermination as pests, fur trapping, and then from diseases and loss of habitat, landscapes began to suffer from their absence in ways we are still beginning to understand. The unencumbered rivers that many think of as normal are actually profoundly altered from their native state, a disturbance that ripples out into ecosystems and landscapes, both locally and downstream. Beaver lodges are entered from underwater, which protects them from most predators. Each lodge generally contains a breeding pair, their yearlings, and newborns. The yearlings help care for the babies. 2-year-olds generally leave the nest to build their own dams and residences. That's the ones I think were working on my trees because they didn't seem to know what they were doing. They were like inept at cutting down trees, but it's the young ones who go out on their own. They're sort of just like everybody, I guess. Anyway, the ponds are beneficial to large numbers of wildlife, including otters, frogs, fish, moose, deer, swans, ducks, songbirds, and butterflies. There are no beavers in South Florida because they would be unable to protect themselves from alligators, underwater predators. So they don't go there. This is Winona. In fact, your Mad Hatter trip is going to go past that one where you see the boards. That's the boardwalk. That's where they had a beaver dam. Okay, I'll talk. These are both in Winona, but they're gone. They fell apart. All right. Recently, there were 2 dams easily visible from the Indian Trail and the George Eldridge Trail along the Monongahela Brook in Winona. Both were washed away in heavy rain, but this is what they looked like. Beaver ponds are created for protection from predators. Beavers place lodges upstream from their dams. They build the dams if they need deeper water for the habitat where their lodge is. In lakes and large rivers, they don't build dams because they have enough water. Dams are generally built where there are small streams and creeks, and a beaver wants to create a larger, deeper body of water for their lodge. By the way, I think their problem with dams on the Monongahela Brook, that becomes a raging torrent in a heavy rain. And I think it's too much water for beavers. So I think what they've done, they've headed further upstream. I haven't seen them for a while. I did see a couple, but they used to be there every day, and they're not anymore. I think they're upstream. But I'll see in November when they start really going to town. This is some of the damage in my yard. You can see the tooth marks on the bark and the trees that they cut down. Okay. That's damage done to the trees in my yard 2 years ago. Beavers leave enough of the trunk to encourage sprouts to emerge. In my yard, the beavers cut down the tulip sapling every year or 2. The one that originally they cut down, they come back. Every time it sprouts, they come back after it gets big enough. When its shoots begin to turn into new trunks, they return and harvest them. They did the same to a young white oak, but I put a fence around it, and they can't keep it from becoming a tree again. We decided to let the beavers be our tree surgeons, and any tree that we don't want disturbed is surrounded with a fence. So I go out in my yard and say, well, we think we want to keep this tree. We circle with a fence. Anything we don't mind if it's cut down, we let the beavers do it. They haven't been working as hard now. The dams those 2 dams failed. Okay, their scientific name is Castor canadensis. They're native to temperate North America. It's a semi-aquatic rodent with a stout body, a large head, long orange chisel-like incisors, hand-like front feet, webbed back feet, and a flat scaly tail. Their teeth have iron in them. That's why they're bright orange like that. It's iron that makes them very strong. You don't want to get bit by a beaver. The European beaver, castor fiber, has a different DNA and cannot breed with canadensis. They're reintroducing European beavers in Europe because they were gone completely, but they're reintroducing them. They can't mate with ours. The only castor refers to the fact that the beaver's genitalia are inside its body. They thought they were castrated because they could never tell a male from a female. The only way to tell a male from a female without opening the body is by odor. And I don't know anybody wants to sniff a beaver, but I wouldn't want to. But they can tell. They can tell. They are herbivorous, consuming tree bark, aquatic plants, grasses, and sedges. Their tails were eaten by mountain men who said they were delicious. They thought the tails were considered a delicacy to the mountain men. I don't know, there's probably lots of other stuff we wouldn't even think of eating. Historically, beavers have been hunted for their fur, meat, and castoreum. Castoreum has been used in medicine, perfume, and food flavorings, while beaver pelts have been a major driver of the fur trade. Before protections began in the 19th and early 20th centuries, overhunting had nearly exterminated both North American and Eurasian beavers. Both are being reintroduced and have rebounded. The beaver in this picture is carrying mud to make a scent mound. He or she will pile it somewhere and shoot castoreum on it to mark territory. They're very territorial, and I've seen fights. They can fight in nasty little spats. They're spats. They kind of. That was so neat to sit and watch them, and then they'd be fighting. They both went to chew on the same tree or something. Okay. The book Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter, tells a story. 2 years after Mississippi River floods cost the Midwest $16 billion, ecobiologists Donald Hay and Nancy Filippi estimated that beaver ponds once covered up to 51 million acres of the upper Mississippi basin, more than 10% of its total area. When those ponds dried up, much of the Midwest's absorptive capacity vanished. This is a quote. At a depth of 3 feet, Hay and Filippi wrote, the original ponded area could have stored more than 3 floods the size of the 1993 event. Paving over wetlands and killing problematic beavers are ecological injuries masquerading as progress. It turns out they build better dams. They've built better dams than people do. They know what to do. They're experts, okay? This was the next thing. It was reported in 2011 that restoring beavers to Utah's Escalante River would provide tens of millions of dollars in benefits each year. Ben Goldfarb, in his book Eager, states, beavers are the animal that doubles as an ecosystem, are ecological and hydrological Swiss Army knives, capable in the right circumstances of tackling just about any landscape scale problem you might confront. Trying to mitigate floods or improve water quality? There's a beaver for that. Hoping to capture more water for agriculture in the face of climate change? Add a beaver. Concerned about sedimentation, salmon populations, wildfires? Take 2 families of beaver and check back in a year. I love that. I thought it was so neat to say that. Paving over wetlands and killing problematic beavers are ecological injuries masquerading as progress. Beavers spend a lot of time grooming, sometimes side by side, sometimes grooming each other, several family members together. Only the same family, though. They don't let strangers. They're very family. And then if you're 2 years old, you're kicked out anyway. The beavers shown here are in a deep river in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where they have a lodge but no need for a dam. The beaver symbolizes industriousness and is a national animal of Canada. Beaver populations have rebounded. They are listed as of least concern by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature Red List of Mammals. The beaver symbolizes industriousness and is the national animal of Canada. Conservation biologists refer to the notion, this is really interesting, the notion of shifting baseline syndrome, a form of long-term amnesia that causes each successive generation to accept its own degraded ecology as normal. It seems that is what has happened to us. We see beavers as invaders, while the truth is their presence and activities are likely crucial to the function of a healthy environment. I thought that was a really interesting comment, shifting baseline syndrome, that you become satisfied with what you've got when it's really egregious. Okay? The National Wildlife Federation sent out a fundraising email with this comment that sums up why we need beavers. Beavers are remarkable ecosystem engineers. The dams they build can help keep water cool during heat waves, cool the surrounding area, mitigate the impact of wildfires, enhance drought resilience, and restore wetland streams and riverscapes. As a keystone species, beavers' instinct to build channels and dams helps many other species of wildlife, including salmon and trout that rely on cooler water temperatures for survival. Okay, this presentation is based, I'm going to read this because this Ben Goldfarb's 2018 book, Eager, The Surprising Secret Life of Beavers and Why They Matter, is a wonderful book. It's very funny and very informative, and you can tell how much he's just so excited about the beavers and that they're coming back. Online, if you're on Facebook, Mike's Photos and Videos of Beavers is a Facebook page with wonderful photos and videos, along with a wealth of information about beavers. Most of the photos in this presentation were taken from Mike's Facebook and YouTube pages. Mike offers all of his material free of charge if it is not used for profit. He, like many others, wants beavers to resume their crucial role in our environment. This guy, Mike, during COVID, he got bored. He was an attorney, actually, an attorney with the Canadian government. And his wife, he got bored sitting home, and so he started photographing beavers in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. It's totally delightful. If you get on his Facebook list, every day you'll see videos, and it's just totally delightful. All these pictures came from him. Most of them, not all of them. Also, there's recommended reading Beaverland. It's called Beaverland, How One Weird Rodent Made America, another interesting book. And then if you're online, go type Beaver Believers into your search engine for a 12-minute program that presents more thorough information about the benefits of beavers than I've given you here. It's a real movement around the country to support beavers and bring them back. Bye. Thank you for your attention.
Any questions?